Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our college campuses will be back in full swing after this holiday weekend. And we thought we'd devote our show this morning to the theme of higher education. Later in the show, Alice Drager from East Lansing will be along to talk to us about her latest controversy over academic censorship. But joining me right now is the president of one of our area's biggest higher education institutions. He is Dr. Brent Knight, president of Lansing Community College. Dr. Knight, welcome back to the show.
Well, good to be with you.
I don't live far from the campus. I saw you out on your bike the other day, surveying, I suppose, what's going on. Capitol Avenue is half shut down for construction, and around the corner on Shiawassee, we're seeing a lot of activity. What are you up to?
Well, we're making major improvements in the right-of-way on both Capitol and Shiawassee. Much of that infrastructure was placed there in 1957. So we're managing many underground issues while at the same time it'll look a lot better, be better lit. We have many pedestrians that come from our various parking lots and they come to our campus. So now, for example, a person who's sight impaired can walk from Saginaw to Shiawassee and not have issues with the surface, and those mats that you may be aware of that are at intersections, they're typically plastic and they're typically a color, and those are to warn persons who are sight impaired that they're approaching an intersection. So if we walk down Capitol today, you would see intersections where they are not, and when this project is done, they will all meet ADA standards for persons sight physically impaired. So all of our ADA grades, there's precision with the slopes, the curbs will be in full compliance.
Yeah, well, and is this also when you're burying the power lines?
We are not burying the power lines. That is very expensive to bury them, and they have been rerouted.
So it'll be more attractive, but they'll still be above ground.
No, they're rerouted, and LCC owns all of the property on the west side of Capitol, from Shiawassee to Saginaw, excepting 3 parcels. So we needed to accommodate those 3 parcels, and we came in from behind on the lot line in back. So because no one could afford to bury the electric.
Now, in this week's paper, we have a photo of the old YMCA column that's been moved to the parking lot at Shiawassee and Capitol. How did that come about, and what do you plan to do with that column?
Well, I go to the post office on Townsend, just south of the Capitol. So I drive by the old YMCA from time to time, and every time I drive by, I'd see that column. So it came to a point where we asked the owner, Julie Lawton and her husband, if they might donate that column to the college. And they graciously donated it to the college. And then I called Dan Schiffer, longtime friend of the college, who expert masonry firm, and I asked Dan if he would provide the laborers, the expert masons, to take it down and put it back up again. And he was most gracious, and so Schiffer Masonry donated the labor to take it down and put it back up again. And it's at Seymour and Shiawassee. And it is 70 years old, and in another month or so, it will be fully restored, lit. It'll look like stained glass. It won't be stained glass, but it'll look like stained glass. It will be nicely landscaped. It's on the western edge of our campus, and we're doing work on Shiawassee at the same time, putting in green space, and again working on the underground and the access issues that I mentioned. It'll be a part of that. It'll be integrated into our whole campus, and I think it'll look great.
I know from talking to you when you first arrived back in 2008 that beautification is very important to you. And you have made significant changes in the look of the campus. Tell us about the art project. How many pieces are there? How many will there be?
Well, we're more than 20, and as an aside, on Friday morning, we're placing one at 10 a.m. on Washington and Shiawassee, and you're certainly invited.
Thank you.
There'll be more than, there are more than 20, and I'm not sure we'll get to 30, but we continue to work at it.
And you have put the LCC name now at the corner of Capitol and Saginaw. Is that park finished, or do you have other
Yes.
plans? It is?
Yes.
So people can come and check it out. Because it was the subject of some controversy, but that's behind us now.
It was controversial. As it turned out, that was my wish, my plan all along, is an urban green space. And there's a seating area there. And next spring, when all the foliage returns, that will be a great spot in downtown Lansing.
Good. Well, let's turn to the academic side of running Lansing Community College. You have a $122 million budget this year. How does that compare to what you would hope for to run a school like this?
Well, our tuition is the lowest among 28 community colleges in Michigan.
Despite your increase?
Oh, yes. I'm in my 8th year, and there were at least 2 years where we didn't raise tuition at all. And in most of the years, we've been at or below the cost of living. So we are prudent in our fiscal management, and will continue to be.
How does the $122 million, though, compare with what you need to run a major institution like this?
Well, with all units of government, there's always a wish to do more and to better serve and to have the resources to do that. But at the same time, it's important for community colleges to be affordable so everyone in the community can take advantage of college programs and services. So it's a constant tension between what you'd like to do and the money that you charge, and finding a balance.
Now, one of our writers, Larry Cosentino, spent some time, one of our writers, Ty Forker, spent some time on campus recently talking to students about the changes, and the sense I got was, yeah, it's nice, but I'd be here anyway. So how do you justify spending money on such things as new parks and new art?
Well, I think it's important for any community college to be well thought of by potential students and the community as a source of community pride. And I'll cite the sycamores in front of Lansing Sexton that were planted when Lansing Sexton was built more than 70 years ago. I think it's an awesome tree line, and I think well of the school board and the superintendent who more than 70 years ago planted those trees. And with that in mind, we're planting 150 trees at Lansing Community College in the next 6 months, and that 50 years from now and 75 and 100 years from now, people will think well of us and what we did for the college, downtown, and the community.
What about what you're planting on the academic side? What are you growing?
Yes. Student success is our top goal in terms of what we're working on academically. There's no point in going to any community college if you don't come out with a credential or credits earned where you've done yourself some good. If you come and you're not successful, it's likely that you've run up debt that if you didn't improve your skill set will be difficult to pay. And there's always an issue with students not being able to pay that loan back. So we're very mindful of that. And again, we have low tuition, and we're engaged in a campus-wide effort to be as helpful as we can for students to be successful. All the support services, tutoring, advising, schedule. Don't take any course that's not helpful to you in ultimately in completion and a plan that benefits you, because you'll incur debt.
Now, Mickey Hurton, in his column this week in City Pulse, citing experts, says that the result of budget cuts over the past decade in Michigan now means that Michigan ranks 42nd for state support of 2- and 4-year public institutions. What are we doing to our future?
Oh, I find that troubling, as you might imagine that I would. And tuition in higher education has gone up more than healthcare in the last 25 years. And I think that's most unfortunate. And if you don't help our citizenry to improve their skill set and their economic value, I mean, that's a negative for people and the economy and the community. So again, it's important for the state to find a balance in taxation versus support of public higher education.
You know, we see, we're almost out of time, but we see conservative members have control of the legislature. Do you think there's a connection between their conservatism and the lack of support relative to other states?
Well, the governor of Michigan is a community college alumnus in Battle Creek, and the governor of Michigan appreciates Michigan's community colleges. So he's been helpful to Michigan's community colleges in the level of funding in the recent past.
All right, well, the LCC is back in class, and if folks are interested in seeing not just what's available outside of the buildings, but can they just wander around, check things out?
Well, as you might imagine, I conduct tours.
Okay.
Usually 2 or more a week. I'm delighted to take groups of all sizes and show them Lansing Community College. It truly is a college like no other, and we're always delighted to show it off to the community.
So contact your office.
By all means.
All right, that's Brent Knight, president of Lansing Community College. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Joining me now is the always interesting Alice Drager from East Lansing. She is a science historian with a wonderful recent book called Galileo's Middle Finger. And she is also remembered for controversy over sex education at East Lansing High School. We want to catch up on that. First, though, Alice, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time.
Thanks
You are
for having me.
and I truly mean it, you are one of the most interesting people in our community. You are now in a new controversy over censorship at Northwestern University, where you were on the faculty but quit. And this was over an article that you helped edit. We do have to be a little careful on language here, but there was some descriptive language about sex in a very interesting, it sounds like a fascinating piece about a gentleman who said basically nurses came to the rescue of his sex life after he had a crippling injury. Tell us how this all unfolded.
Sure. So Bill Peace is the author of this article, and he's a cultural anthropologist at Syracuse University. And at the age of 18, because of actually a congenital disease that he had, he became spinal cord injured. So it wasn't an accident, but it was a disease. And at that time, this was the late 1970s, rehabilitation medicine was very new. Men were not surviving and women were not surviving with spinal cord injuries really long term until about that time. And so Bill, at the age of 18, was wondering, could he still have sex? Would he be able to have a father? And the doctors weren't answering any of his questions. But one of the nurses who got to know him over months of stay reassured him by providing a sex act and gave him the reassurance that his sexuality would still function, that he could be a father. And he described this in the article as a very compassionate act, as something that really gave him back a sense that there would be a future in his life. So the reason I published the article was both because as a medical historian I found it interesting that he's describing this sort of Wild West period of rehabilitation medicine, but also because he was raising the question, why is it still so far in the future we're still not really adequately dealing with the sexual needs of persons with disability, including just in terms of information. So that's why I published it. And what happened was our dean at the medical school at Northwestern decided that this article might violate the branding agreement with Northwestern Memorial Hospital, which had just essentially purchased the medical school. And so he ordered it to be censored. And that was in March of 2014, so last year. And for about a year, I tried to get it solved internally. Then I started getting annoyed, as did another colleague of mine who had worked on it with me, Christy Kirshner, who's a rehabilitation physician and a disability scholar. And Christy ended up resigning over it last year in December. I fought a little longer, tried to get the provost's office at Northwestern to acknowledge that censorship had occurred and to assure me specifically that it would not occur again, that I would not be subject to a branding agreement where my academic freedom was concerned. But the provost insisted on not acknowledging the error and only continually sort of saying these vague statements about academic freedom. And I told him I can't work in an environment like that, so I turned in my resignation.
How has Northwestern reacted to that?
Northwestern did exactly what we all predicted they would do, which is to claim it's a personnel issue and therefore they can't discuss it, which is really funny because until I quit, they were discussing it in the media because Bill and I had both decided to go public. Christy had decided to go public, so we went public and started talking about the branding agreement and the way in which it involved censorship. But once I turned in my resignation, I think they honestly decided that we had the facts on our side, that they looked very bad, so they claimed personnel matter. Even though my letter is public, they could certainly respond to a public letter making charges of censorship.
Is it as simple as Northwestern didn't like one word in this article?
It really wasn't Northwestern. It really was the dean of the medical school who perhaps acts a little impetuously sometimes. He has a bit of a reputation. And in this case, made a fatal error in terms of academic freedom. Now, the provost could have decided to do something about it. And in fact, in April, literally the day of the sex ed tweeting, I was scheduled to go see my provost, so I drove from the high school to Evanston, met with the provost who had read my book, and so I brought it up and I said, you know, this book is all about academic freedom. I'm in a bizarre position where I'm having to stay silent over censorship at Northwestern, and I'd really like you to fix it. And all he did was sort of say, well, I'll look into it. and there's just so much I can do. And I said, just so much you can do. You're the chief academic officer. You can stop this. You can call it out. But he didn't do that. So a month later is when we decided to go public.
So was his complaint, did it really come down to one word?
No, it came down to the whole article as far as he was concerned, the description of this happening in a medical facility ever. And my reaction was, did you catch that it was 1978? Did you catch that it was somewhere else? I mean, we're not allowed to even discuss things that might offend us in the present day, but that happened 35 years ago?
Was the article published?
It was
a
already,
censored version
it
was
actually
published?
published. So when the censorship occurred, it was post-publication.
Oh.
And that's why we don't just call it sort of, low-level censorship of editorial interference. This was actually post-publication. The issue of the issue of Atrium, the theme was on Bad Girls, had already been mailed out to about 3,000 subscribers. It was already online. They couldn't pull back the paper copy.
Right.
All they could do was insist that the online version be pulled, which is what they did. And to make things worse, after that, we also were informed that from now on, if Atrium was to be published, there would be a committee that had to vet everything that was published in it. And on the committee was the dean's office as well as the PR department. And the editor-in-chief of Atrium, Katie Watson, had one meeting with that group and said, forget it, I'm not going to publish under this stricture. We all took to calling it the censorship committee because the idea that a faculty journal would have to be passed by the PR department is pretty appalling.
What is the connection between branding and censorship?
The branding problem has been expanding in universities over the years because universities have very much given into this sort of corporate model of looking at market share and how they're perceived in the market, and so they've become very obsessed with it. Universities all over the country are spending millions of dollars in marketing advice to get their logo just so, to change the way their mascot looks, to insist that faculty use a particular type of PowerPoint slide when they go out and give talks. So that's happening all over the country. But I think my case in some ways is unusual that there's such a clear link with the dean saying that it violates the branding agreement, so we're going to pull it, is I think probably one of the first cases in the country, which is why it was so particularly ironic that I was literally doing the page proofing and the lawyering and the fact checking on Galileo's Middle Finger, my book on academic freedom, and they're doing this to me. So I was going and saying, you're putting me in a really terrible position. I'm not good at staying quiet, nor am I good at being a hypocrite. I kept saying, don't put me in this position. And they just kept giving me this Orwellian response, congratulations on your book.
What has this? I know you've had some coverage of this nationally. Is this in academic circles? Is this quite a big deal?
It is actually quite a big deal. When I searched Northwestern out of curiosity to see what comes up in news yesterday, it was this. It's been in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed, the USA Today college version. It was one of the most read articles. It's still yesterday. It's been sent all around. So it's clearly making its way around all over the country, but also all over the world in terms of a story, which to me is really funny because it was such a minor case in some ways, right? It was an article that now so many people have read and said, I don't really understand where the offense was. What was the concern? Because the article is actually a pretty academic article. So a lot of people don't even understand why it's become such a thing, except that it was a clear case of censorship of branding. And as I said, it was not we're going to edit it before it's published. It was a pulling post-publication.
Right. Now, you live in East Lansing. You were on the faculty of Michigan State University. We just did an article in this week's paper about the corporatization of Michigan State University. What are your thoughts about how Michigan State is dealing with what is a reality on campuses, all this branding?
Yeah, I think Michigan State, when I compare it to Northwestern, now I don't work at MSU, so I might have a different experience. I'm just wandering around MSU. I'm married to the dean of the medical school at MSU, so I may have a very different experience than the faculty there. But my experience at MSU is that it is not the corporate glitzy place that Northwestern is. It's not the kind of place where you're asked to teach medical ethics in a room named after the drug company that bought the room for the medical school, which was true at Northwestern. I was asked to teach medical ethics in the Searle room, which is a drug company.
It really does send a message, doesn't it?
Northwestern is a glitzy place. When I went to the State of the School address 2 deans ago, actually, the only mention of medical education in the entire 45-minute presentation was one mention of one class on medical entrepreneurship, which I found really quite stunning. When I go to MSU, there actually does seem to be a real dedication to the fundamental mission of the land-grant university. Now, is MSU using that as a branding concept? Yes. The Spartans Will program is very much about branding the land-grant mission. That said, when I see the Spartans Will program, I find myself thinking, man, at Northwestern we would never have an entire major campaign dedicated to public service. It just doesn't happen. We have major campaigns, or I should say had major campaigns at Northwestern dedicated to corporate partnerships and that kind of thing. So it's a very different feel.
Interesting. So the branding at Embassy, I guess there's good branding and bad branding.
I frankly wish that they would just stop spending so much money on branding. Just full stop. Part of the reason that they're doing this is because they're all very obsessed with their USA Today rankings, their rankings in US News and World Reports rankings. They're very obsessed with those rankings, and so much ends up depending on those rankings. They're also obsessed with how the federal government sees them, and so they're constantly trying to create these sort of brand identities with donors, with the athletics programs, and they're playing catch up with each other. So there's this sort of arms race of branding happening between universities. To my mind, it's a terrible waste of money. And it's something that if we really cared about the central missions of universities, we would not spend a lot of time branding. We would really focus on mission, not brand.
Well, let's turn, if we can, to a different level of education, high school, because you certainly got a lot of attention when you found out how sex ed was being taught at East Lansing High School, where your son is a student. You tweeted about it, and some people, I guess, wanted to censor your tweeting as your language was strong. But where do things stand now?
Well, where it stands now is the school board has been revisiting the sex ed. They actually, as you guys reported very well, I was very impressed with Todd Hayworth's reporting on this. The East Lansing Public Schools turns out to be in violation of the law in multiple ways, including in terms of not having had the Sex Ed Advisory Committee meeting, in terms of not covering the curriculum appropriately. Really, a lot of this I learned post the tweeting from the City Pulse reporting. But they're trying to sort of play catch up, and I think they have some hope of playing catch up. The good thing is they've decided not to allow the SMART program back in the school, and this was a right-wing program funded out of a Lansing pregnancy counseling group, which is a pro-life group, basically designed to scare kids out of having sex, which we know the data shows doesn't work. But these were the folks who happened to come in on the day that I was there, who were doing things like playing a game with the kids, suggesting that 1 out of 6 times you have sex, you're going to end up pregnant, which I found pretty ridiculous. So they're no longer coming into the schools. We're glad that they're actually going to let our real teachers teach sex ed and not have these outside visitors in. But that said, I think there's a lot of work still to be done in the curriculum. There still seems to be no discussion of LGBT identity in the curriculum. So no concern about that population, which we know is a high-risk population for self-harm, for suicide, for gay bashing, for all sorts of things. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And I've tried not to be overly involved in that because I think that what I did was so kind of explosive, although I didn't think it would be that explosive. I thought my 2,000 at the time followers would find it funny and interesting and horrifying, but not that it would go worldwide and I'd end up getting interviews in Australia and Ireland, which was very strange. But sex ed hits a nerve. So I've tried mostly to just stay back on it, but just keep an eye on it to see what's going on. And we've got some good folks on the school board really trying to push for a more evidence-based, more sex-progressive curriculum. So I think we have some hope. But we're very limited, as you know, in what we can do because the state law requires certain things about sex ed in the schools. And so they require the teaching of abstinence, although not abstinence only. But to my mind, I think we still have to define what the heck abstinence means. When I go around and interview people, or when I'm interviewed by people and I ask them, what do you think abstinence means, everybody gives me a different answer.
Well, we are just about out of time, but I guess then there's more to come on this issue.
Yeah, I think so, much more on the sex ed issue. And lots of interesting things going on in East Lansing Public Schools. There was just an issue of censorship with the school newspaper, which has now been turned around. So lots of interesting stuff going on. I think it'll get more interesting. Some of the students there have asked me to do a master class on Freedom of Information Act for them so that they can learn how to FOIA their own school administration's information.
Oh, great.
So
future lawyers of America.
No, future journalists.
Future journalists, okay, good. Well, Alice Traeger, thank you, and it's great to finally have you on the show. And that is our show for today, but if you want to hear more from City Pulse, turn on The Impact, 88.9 FM. Our radio show begins in just a minute or two. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great Labor Day weekend.